The midnight sky stretched endlessly above the city, painted in shades of deep indigo and silver, as if the heavens themselves had conspired to create this one perfect hour. The streets were almost empty, glistening softly after the evening rain, their reflections shimmering like liquid stars. She stood beneath a lone street lamp, her crimson scarf fluttering gently in the wind, eyes glistening with the kind of sadness that only love could carve. Every drop of rain that touched her skin seemed to echo the rhythm of her heartbeat, slow, uncertain, waiting. And then, through the faint fog that drifted along the street, she saw him. His figure moved with the same quiet grace she remembered, his steps hesitant yet full of purpose. When he finally reached her, there was no greeting, no words, only silence, the kind that was filled with memories too heavy to speak aloud. The air between them trembled as though even time hesitated to intrude. He raised his hand slowly, fingers brushing a strand of her hair away from her face. And in that tender motion, every moment they had lost seemed to return in a rush of warmth. Her breath caught, trembling against the quiet hum of the city. The rain began again, soft and forgiving, cascading over them like a blessing from the stars. She didn't step back. Instead, she tilted her face slightly upward, her eyes closing as if surrendering to something she had resisted for far too long. And then, his lips met hers. The kiss was not a beginning nor an end, it was a remembering. It carried the ache of the nights they had spent apart, the words they had buried, the dreams they had both been too afraid to chase. His hand rested gently against the back of her neck, pulling her closer until the world itself disappeared. The faint taste of rain lingered between them, mingling with the warmth of their breath. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but that fragile, beautiful connection, the collision of two souls who had spent lifetimes searching for the same kind of peace. Around them, the streetlight flickered softly, the sound of distant thunder rolling across the horizon like a lullaby. When they finally pulled away, their foreheads rested together. Eyes closed, breath still tangled. She smiled faintly, tears glimmering at the corners of her lashes. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded, his voice breaking softly through the quiet. "I never really left." And as the rain fell harder, wrapping them in a silver curtain, the midnight itself seemed to hold them close, two hearts reunited beneath the endless sky. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, woven with everything they had once been and everything they were too afraid to say. Her gaze lowering as her fingers brushed against the pendant around her neck, the same one he had given her 2 winters ago, before life had torn them apart. It glimmered faintly beneath the streetlight, a fragile reminder of promises once made and never truly forgotten. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice trembling between resistance and longing. "I had to," he said quietly, the rain sliding down his face like unshed tears. "Every night without you felt like waiting for a dawn that never came." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, the weight of regret, the endless miles he must have crossed just to stand before her again. Time had changed him, his jaw was sharper, his posture more solemn, his hands rougher from the work of rebuilding a life that never felt complete. Yet beneath it all, he was still the same, the boy who used to chase her laughter through crowded streets, who would write her love notes folded into paper stars, who had once kissed her under a downpour and promised he'd never let go. "You broke that promise," she said softly, not accusingly, but as if naming a ghost. His shoulders sagged under the truth of it. "I know," he murmured. "But I've been trying to find the pieces ever since." The rain intensified, drumming against the pavement, but neither of them moved. He took a hesitant step closer, his voice lower now, barely audible above the storm. "Do you still walk by the river?" he asked. Her lips parted in surprise. Of all the things to remember, he had remembered that. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice softer now, fragile as glass. "When I can't sleep." He smiled faintly, a sad curve of his mouth that carried both pain and peace. "I waited there, you know," he said. "Every year, on this night." Her heart twisted, the night they had first met, beneath the same streetlight, when everything had felt infinite and possible. A tear slipped down her cheek, mingling with the rain. "And if I hadn't come tonight?" she asked, half afraid of the answer. He met her eyes, his expression unwavering. "Then I would have waited another year." The words lingered between them, A confession born not from desperation but from devotion, quiet, unwavering, timeless. She felt something stir deep within her chest, something she thought had long since faded. The ache of missing him began to shift into something gentler, warmer. And as the clock struck 12, echoing faintly through the wet streets, she realized that maybe midnight wasn't the end of things after all. Maybe it was where love began again, in the spaces between regret and forgiveness, under a sky that had never stopped watching over them. They began to walk, slowly at first, their footsteps echoing softly along the glistening street. The rain had softened into a mist now, delicate and dreamlike, as if the night itself wanted to cradle them gently. Streetlights stretched their golden halos across puddles, catching glimpses of their reflection, two figures moving side by side, neither quite the same as before, yet still tethered by something unseen. For a while, they didn't speak. Words felt too fragile for moments like this. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore, it was alive, breathing, carrying the rhythm of two hearts slowly remembering how to beat in harmony. She glanced at him from time to time, as if to convince herself he was really there, that he hadn't vanished like before. Each time, he caught her gaze and smiled that same faint, unguarded smile, the one that used to undo her completely. They passed the little cafe on the corner, the one that had once been theirs, where they had spent rainy evenings with coffee and laughter, sketching dreams on napkins and pretending the world outside didn't exist. The sign still flickered, half-lit, stubbornly clinging to life. She stopped, staring through the window at the empty tables inside, and for a heartbeat, she could almost see them, younger, freer, untouched by time or fear. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been?" she asked, her voice soft, her eyes never leaving the glass. He stepped closer, his reflection merging with hers in the window. "All the time," he replied. "But maybe we needed to lose each other to understand what it meant to find each other again." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth and tenderness, and she turned to look at him, the corners of her lips trembling between sorrow and a smile. They continued walking, the city unfolding quietly around them. Neon lights shimmered on wet concrete, the sound of distant music drifting from a late-night bar, the faint aroma of jasmine from a passing garden. Everything felt strangely alive, as if the world was conspiring to remind them of all they had once loved. Her hand brushed against his as they walked, and instinctively, his fingers intertwined with hers, hesitant at first, then sure. The warmth of his touch pulsed through her like a promise, steady and real. "I thought I'd forgotten how this felt," she whispered, not looking up. "You never forgot," he said gently. "You just stopped believing it could last." She smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "And now?" He exhaled slowly, the sound mingling with the quiet drizzle. "Now I'd rather break than let go again." They reached the bridge that crossed over the sleeping river, its surface glimmering like molten glass beneath the city lights. The same bridge where, years ago, they had first confessed their love beneath a sky full of stars. She leaned on the railing, looking down at the water. "Everything looks the same," she said softly. "But it feels different now." He stepped beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "It's not the city that changed," he murmured. "It's us." The truth of it settled between them like a sigh, not painful, not heavy, just real. And in that stillness, with the rain whispering softly against the water and the world holding its breath, they stood together not as what they were, not yet as what they might become, but simply as two souls who had finally found the courage to stand in the same place again. The river murmured softly below, carrying fragments of light that shimmered like broken stars. For a long time, they said nothing. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of everything they had both run from. He stood beside her, watching the reflections tremble on the surface, and finally, he spoke. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," he said, his voice low, roughened by emotion. "I left because I was scared I wasn't enough, scared I'd ruin the one thing in my life that felt pure." His confession came like a storm breaking quietly across the horizon. She turned toward him, the wind sweeping her hair across her face, eyes wide and wet. "You didn't ruin it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You just left it unfinished." He flinched at the truth of her words, his gaze falling to the ground. "I know," he murmured. "Every day without you felt like walking through an empty city, everything familiar, but nothing alive." He lifted his eyes to meet hers again, and there was no distance left in them now, no walls, no pride. I thought time would make me forget, but it only made me remember more clearly the sound of your laugh, the way your hands always found mine, the way you looked at the world like it still believed in miracles. The rain had slowed to a mist, wrapping them in silver air. She took a small step forward, her voice barely above a breath. Then why didn't you come back sooner? He hesitated, the answer lingering heavy between them. Because I didn't think I deserved to, he said finally. You gave me everything, and I gave you distance. I kept thinking you'd move on, that you'd find someone who wouldn't disappear when things got hard. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled through it, a soft, sad smile that carried both pain and grace. You don't get to decide what I move on from, she said gently. You were never a mistake, just a lesson that I never stopped loving. Her words struck something deep within him, that quiet place where regret and hope coexist. He looked down at her, his expression soft, unguarded, almost disbelieving. It feels different, he murmured, his voice still hushed, as if he feared waking the sleeping city. It is different, she replied, lifting her gaze to meet his. Because this time, we're not fighting the night. We're learning to live inside it. Her words lingered in the cool air, warm and sure. He smiled, a small, quiet smile that carried more meaning than any vow ever could. The light of dawn touched his face, turning the silver of the rain into gold, and she realized how much she had missed this, not just him, but the version of herself that only existed when he was near. He brushed his thumb against her cheek, tracing the outline of her smile, then leaned forward until his forehead rested gently against hers. No words were needed, the world around them spoke enough. Beneath them, the river flowed on, endless and forgiving, carrying the reflection of the awakening sky. The bridge, the streetlight, the soft hum of the city, everything seemed to belong to this moment, as if time itself had paused to witness their quiet reunion. Do you think love always finds its way back? She asked softly, her voice fragile as a wish. He took a breath, his fingers tightening around hers. Only if it's real, he said. And ours never stopped being real. She smiled, her eyes glistening in the early light. For a moment, she closed them, letting the warmth of the rising sun settle on her skin, feeling its quiet promise seep through her bones. The night, once heavy and endless, had finally learned to breathe again, and in that breath, she found the truth she had been waiting for all along. When she opened her eyes, the city was waking, shop signs flickering, curtains stirring, a new rhythm beginning. He turned toward her, his voice a whisper. Come home with me. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she reached up and kissed him, soft, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that didn't belong to endings, but to everything that comes after. The bridge, the river, the night, the dawn, all of it seemed to fold around them, carrying their story into the light. And as they walked hand in hand toward the rising sun, the world behind them fading into gold, it felt less like a beginning and more like a return, to love, to peace, to forever.